My name is Marcus. I am 28 years old, and right now I am standing in a lawyer's office about to hear my grandfather's last will read out loud. But that is not what is making my heart pound so hard I can barely breathe. Across the room, sitting on the other side of this mahogany table, are two people I have not seen in almost 3 decades. My biological parents, the same people who abandoned me when I was just 4 months old. They do not recognize me, but I recognize them. I have stared at their faces in the only photograph my grandfather kept. And what happened next when that lawyer opened my grandfather's will? It changed everything I thought I knew about family, about betrayal, and about the true meaning of love. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you are watching from today. Hit that like button if you believe that real family is about more than just blood. And make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Because trust me, you are not going to believe what was written in that final will. I was 4 months old when Daniel and Patricia decided they did not want to be parents anymore. That is what my grandfather told me years later, when I was finally old enough to understand. 4 months. I had not even learned to sit up on my own yet. I had not spoken my first word. I had not taken my first step. But somehow, in that short time, my biological parents had already decided I was too much of a burden. My grandfather's name was Harold Bennett. He was 60 years old when he and my grandmother Eleanor suddenly found themselves raising an infant again. They had already done their time. They had already raised their son Daniel, given him everything they could, loved him the way parents are supposed to love their children. And now, in what should have been their peaceful retirement years, they were starting over with me. Daniel was their only child. He was 22 when I was born, and so was Patricia, his wife. They were young, sure. But plenty of young people raise children. Plenty of young people figure it out, make sacrifices, grow up because they have to. Daniel and Patricia were not those kinds of people. From what my grandfather told me, Daniel had always been selfish. Not in the small, forgivable ways that most people are selfish, but in a deep, fundamental way that seemed to be woven into his very character. He wanted what he wanted when he wanted it, and he did not care who got hurt along the way. My grandmother Eleanor had spoiled him, my grandfather admitted. Being their only child, Daniel never learned to share, never learned to sacrifice, never learned that the world did not revolve around him. Patricia was different, but not in a good way. Where Daniel was openly selfish, Patricia was calculating. She knew how to smile at the right moments, how to say the right things, how to make people believe she cared. But underneath that pleasant surface was a coldness that my grandfather said he sensed from the very first time Daniel brought her home. She looked at everything and everyone like she was trying to figure out what they could give her. When Patricia got pregnant with me, she wanted to end the pregnancy. My grandfather told me this when I was 23 during one of our late-night conversations in the living room. His voice was heavy with old pain when he said it. Patricia had made an appointment at a clinic. She had not even told Daniel at first. But somehow my grandmother found out, and she begged Patricia to reconsider. She offered to help with everything. Money, babysitting, whatever they needed. Eleanor promised that having this baby would not ruin their lives. Patricia agreed to keep me. But looking back, my grandfather said he should have known then that her heart was never in it. She went through the pregnancy like it was an inconvenience she was enduring. She did not read baby books. She did not decorate a nursery. She did not seem excited or scared or any of the things expectant mothers usually feel. She just waited for it to be over. I was born on a Tuesday in March at a hospital in Portland, Oregon. My grandparents were in the waiting room when I came into the world. My grandfather told me that when he first held me, when he looked into my tiny face, he felt something click into place in his heart. He said he knew right then that he would do anything for me, anything at all. For 4 months, Daniel and Patricia played at being parents. They lived in a small apartment across town, and my grandparents visited as often as they could. My grandmother noticed things that worried her. The apartment was never quite clean enough. There was not always enough formula. Patricia seemed detached, going through the motions of motherhood without any real connection. Daniel was barely ever home, always out with friends, or working late, or doing anything to avoid the responsibilities waiting for him. Then one night, everything changed. It was a Thursday. My grandparents had just come home from dinner when the phone rang. It was Daniel asking if they could come over right away. Something in his voice made my grandfather's stomach drop. When they arrived at the apartment, they found me sleeping in my crib completely alone. Daniel and Patricia were standing by the door with suitcases packed. Daniel handed my grandfather a folded piece of paper. On it were just 2 sentences. "We are not ready. Please take care of him." My grandfather told me he tried to stop them. He grabbed Daniel's arm, demanded to know what was happening, begged them to think about what they were doing. But Daniel pulled away. He would not even look his own father in the eye. Patricia was already walking down the hallway toward the elevator. And just like that, they were gone. My grandfather stood in that doorway for a long time, holding that piece of paper, listening to my grandmother sob in the other room where she was picking me up from my crib. I was still asleep. I had no idea that my whole world had just shattered around me. I had no idea that the 2 people who were supposed to protect me had just walked away without a single glance back. That was the night I became Harold and Eleanor Bennett's responsibility. That was the night they stopped being grandparents and started being my parents in every way that mattered. They took me home to their house in the suburbs of Portland, a cozy 2-story place with a big backyard and an apple tree that my grandfather had planted 20 years earlier. That house became my home. Those 2 people became my world. They never heard from Daniel and Patricia again. Not really. My grandfather tried to reach out at first. He called the phone number they had, but it was disconnected within a week. He sent letters to their apartment, but they all came back marked "Return to Sender." He even hired a private investigator for a few months, but Daniel and Patricia had covered their tracks well. They did not want to be found. The only time Daniel ever made contact was when he needed something. And that something was always money. But those calls came later, years down the road. In those early days, those early months and years after they abandoned me, there was nothing but silence. I grew up in that house in Portland surrounded by more love than I knew what to do with. My grandmother Eleanor was the warmest person I have ever known. She had been an elementary school teacher before she retired, and she brought the same patience and gentleness to raising me. She read to me every night before bed. She taught me how to bake cookies and how to plant flowers and how to be kind even when kindness was hard. She never raised her voice at me, not once, even when I probably deserved it. My grandfather Harold was different, but his love was just as deep. He had been a construction engineer, and he built things the way he did everything else, with precision, with care, with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. He taught me how to use tools, how to fix things that were broken, how to look at a problem from every angle before deciding how to solve it. We spent countless hours in his workshop, in the garage building birdhouses and shelves, and once an entire treehouse in the backyard. But more than the skills he taught me, my grandfather gave me something I did not even know I needed. He gave me a sense of worth. He told me every single day that I was loved, that I was wanted, that I belonged. He never let me feel like a burden, even though I knew taking care of a baby at 60 years old could not have been easy. He made me feel like I was the greatest gift he had ever received. I was 7 years old the first time I asked about my parents. We were sitting under the apple tree in the backyard, eating slices of fruit my grandmother had cut for us, when I looked at my grandfather and asked why I did not have a mom and dad like the other kids at school. I remember the way his face changed, the way something painful flickered across his eyes before he could hide it. He took a deep breath and pulled me closer to him, and then he tried to explain something that no 7-year-old should ever have to understand. He told me that sometimes people are not ready to be parents, that sometimes even grown-ups make choices that do not make sense, choices that hurt the people who love them. He told me that my biological parents had their own problems, their own struggles, and that leaving me with him and Grandma was the best thing they knew how to do at the time. He never said a bad word about Daniel. Not then, not ever. Even after everything that happened, even after all the years of silence and abandonment, my grandfather never badmouthed his own son in front of me. He let me form my own opinions when I was old enough to know the full truth. But I saw the pain in his eyes that day under the apple tree. I saw the way my grandmother wiped away a tear when she thought I was not looking. And even at 7 years old, I understood that something very wrong had happened. Something that had hurt all of us in ways I could not yet comprehend. That was the last time I asked about my biological parents for many years. I did not want to see that pain in my grandparents' eyes again. I did not want to be the reason they cried. So I buried my questions deep inside me and focused on the family. I had the family that had chosen to love me when the people who were supposed to love me had walked away. The years that followed were the happiest of my life, even if I did not realize it at the time. Childhood has a way of feeling ordinary while you are living it. It is only later when you look back that you understand how precious those moments were. My grandmother made every holiday feel magical. Christmas mornings filled with presents and pancakes. Thanksgivings with too much food and long naps on the couch. Easters with egg hunts in the backyard. She created traditions that made our small family feel complete, made me forget that anything was missing. My grandfather was my hero. He was tall and strong, with hands that were rough from years of hard work, but always gentle when they held mine. He taught me how to ride a bike, running alongside me until I found my balance. He taught me how to throw a football, how to change a tire, how to shake someone's hand like I meant it. He taught me what it meant to be a man, not through lectures, but through example. We worked on the house together constantly. There was always something that needed fixing, always a project that needed doing. But I think my grandfather invented half of those projects, just so we could spend time together. We built a new front porch when I was 12. We renovated the basement when I was 14. We spent an entire summer repainting every room in the house, listening to old rock and roll on a paint-splattered radio. School was good too. I was a decent student, nothing spectacular. But I tried hard, and that was enough for my grandparents. They never pressured me to be perfect. They just wanted me to do my best and be happy. When I struggled with math in 8th grade, my grandfather sat with me every night until I understood. When I failed my first driving test, my grandmother made me cookies and told me that everyone fails sometimes and that what matters is getting back up. I had friends went to parties, played on the basketball team for 2 years before realizing I was not tall enough to go anywhere with it. I had crushes and heartbreaks and all the normal teenage drama that feels so important when you are living through it. Looking back, I was just a regular kid living a regular life. And that normalcy was a gift my grandparents gave me. They made me feel like I was not the abandoned child, not the kid whose parents did not want him. They made me feel like I was just Marcus, their grandson, their boy, their pride and joy. But underneath all of that happiness, there was always a question mark, a shadow that I could not quite shake. Sometimes I would lie awake at night and wonder about Daniel and Patricia. Where were they? What were they doing? Did they ever think about me? Did they regret what they had done? I never asked these questions out loud, but they lived inside me, taking up space in my heart that should have been empty. My grandmother Eleanor started getting sick when I was 17. At first, it was just little things. Forgetting where she put her keys, getting tired more easily than usual, losing weight without trying. We all thought it was just age, just the natural slowing down that happens to everyone. But then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor said it in such a clinical way, like he was reading off a grocery list, not destroying our entire world. He said she had maybe 6 months, maybe less. There was nothing they could do. It had spread too far too fast. All we could do now was make her comfortable. Those 6 months were the hardest of my life, but also in a strange way, some of the most precious. I graduated from high school during that time, and my grandmother insisted on being there, even though she was so weak she had to use a wheelchair. She sat in the front row wrapped in a blanket, even though it was June, and she cheered louder than anyone when my name was called. That is one of my most treasured memories. Her face so thin and pale, but shining with pure joy. She died on a Sunday morning in August with my grandfather and me sitting on either side of her hospital bed. She had been in hospice care for 2 weeks at that point, and we knew it was coming. But knowing does not make it easier. Nothing makes it easier. The last thing she said to me, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left, and she said, Marcus, you are the greatest gift we ever received. Never forget that you are loved. Never forget that you are enough. Promise me. I promised her. I promised her through tears so thick I could barely see her face. And then she closed her eyes, and she was gone. My grandfather did not speak for 3 days after her funeral. He just sat in his armchair in the living room, staring at the wall, holding the wedding ring he had slipped off her finger before they closed the casket. I did not know what to do. I was 18 years old, barely an adult, and the only mother I had ever known was gone. And now I had to be strong for the only father I had ever known. We got through it together. That is what you do when you love someone. You carry each other through the darkness until you find the light again. My grandfather eventually started talking again, started eating again, started living again. But something in him had changed. Some light had gone out behind his eyes. He had lost the love of his life, and no amount of time would ever fully heal that wound. I made a decision during those dark days. I had been accepted to several colleges, some of them faraway prestigious schools that would have looked great on a resume. But I chose to stay. I enrolled at Portland State University close enough that I could live at home and be with my grandfather. He tried to talk me out of it. He said I should not limit my future because of him. But I told him the truth, that there was nowhere else I would rather be than with the person who had given me everything. I studied architecture, following in my grandfather's footsteps in a way. He had built things his whole life, and now I wanted to design them. He was so proud when I told him my major. He showed me his old blueprints. His old projects told me stories about buildings he had helped construct all over Oregon. Those conversations over coffee at the kitchen table are some of my most cherished memories from college. We developed a routine, my grandfather and I. Breakfast together every morning before I left for class. Dinner together every evening, cooking meals from the recipes my grandmother had left behind. Weekends working on the house, even though there was less and less that needed fixing. We were two people holding on to each other, holding on to the memory of the woman we both loved. My grandfather never remarried. He never even dated. When I asked him about it once, he just smiled and said that when you have loved someone the way he loved Eleanor, no one else could ever compare. She was his soulmate, his partner, his best friend. And even though she was gone, she was still the only woman for him. It was during those years, those quiet years of college and healing, that my grandfather started telling me more about Daniel, about my biological father, about the son who had disappointed him in ways he could not even begin to explain. It happened on a night when neither of us could sleep. I was 23 years old, a year away from graduating with my architecture degree. My grandfather and I were sitting in the living room, the same room where we had sat with my grandmother so many times before. The clock on the mantel said it was almost 2 a.m, but neither of us wanted to go to bed. My grandfather had been quiet all evening, which was unusual for him. He was normally full of stories, full of jokes, full of that warm energy that made everyone around him feel comfortable. But tonight something was weighing on him. I could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, the way his eyes kept drifting to the old family photograph on the shelf. The one that included Daniel. "Grandpa," I said, finally breaking the silence. "What is it? Something is bothering you." He looked at me for a long moment like he was deciding something. Then he sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "I have never told you the whole truth about your father," he said. "About Daniel, about why he and Patricia really left. I thought I was protecting you by keeping it simple. But you are a man now. You deserve to know." My heart started beating faster. This was a conversation I had waited my entire life to have, even if I had not always admitted it to myself. This was the answer to the question mark that had lived inside me for as long as I could remember. My grandfather leaned back in his chair and began to talk. He told me things I had never known, things that changed my understanding of my own history. He told me about Daniel's childhood, about the warning signs that he and Eleanor had missed or ignored. The way Daniel would lie without any apparent guilt, even about small things. The way he would charm adults with his smile while bullying other children when no one was watching. The way he seemed to lack empathy, to be unable to understand or care about the feelings of others. We thought he would grow out of it, my grandfather said. We thought it was just a phase, but he never did. He just got better at hiding it. He told me about Patricia, about the first time Daniel brought her home to meet the family. She was beautiful, my grandfather admitted, and she could be charming when she wanted to be. But there was something cold behind her eyes, something calculating. She looked at our house, our car, our neighborhood, and I could see her doing mental math, figuring out what we were worth. Daniel and Patricia got married young, just a year after they started dating. My grandparents paid for the wedding, hoping that marriage would settle Daniel down, give him some responsibility. But instead, the two of them fed off each other's worst qualities. Daniel's selfishness combined with Patricia's materialism created a toxic cocktail. They spent money faster than they could make it. They burned through jobs, through friendships, through every opportunity that came their way. When Patricia got pregnant, my grandfather said, "I thought maybe that would finally change things. I thought a baby might wake Daniel up, make him realize it was time to grow up." But instead, they saw the pregnancy as another obstacle, another inconvenience. He told me about Patricia's plan to end the pregnancy, about my grandmother's tearful intervention, about the promises that were made. He told me about the 9 months of waiting, hoping, praying that somehow things would work out. And then he told me about the night they left. Daniel could not even look at me when he handed me that note, my grandfather said, his voice thick with old emotion. His own son. And he could not look me in the eye. That is when I knew. That is when I knew I had lost him forever. I sat there in silence, absorbing everything he was telling me. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But there was also something else. Something that felt almost like relief. For 23 years, I had wondered if there was something wrong with me. If I had done something even as a baby to make my parents not want me, now I knew the truth. It was never about me. It was always about them. My grandfather continued. He told me about the years that followed, about Daniel's occasional phone calls. Every few years, like clockwork, Daniel would reach out, but never to ask about me. Never to see how I was doing, how I was growing, what kind of person I was becoming. No. He only called when he needed money. The first time was 5 years after they left, my grandfather said. Daniel called asking for $10,000, said he was in trouble with some people, needed to pay off a debt. I said no. I told him the money I had was for your future, for your education. He cursed at me and hung up, did not hear from him again for 3 more years. The pattern repeated over and over. Daniel would call desperate for cash, spinning some story about bad luck or unfair circumstance. My grandfather always refused, and Daniel always disappeared again afterward, not to be heard from until the next crisis. Not once, my grandfather said, his voice hardening. Not once did he ask about you, his own son. I would tell him how you were doing in school, what sports you were playing, and he would just change the subject back to money. It was like you did not exist to him. I felt something shift inside me when I heard those words. The last lingering hope I had been holding onto, the hope that maybe Daniel and Patricia thought about me sometimes, wondered about me, regretted what they had done. That hope finally died. And in its place came a strange sort of peace. I had my answer. I knew where I stood. My grandfather reached over and took my hand. He looked into my eyes with such love, such fierce protection, that I almost started crying. I am sorry, he said. I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I wanted to protect you. But you have a right to know who they really are. I squeezed his hand back. You have nothing to be sorry for, I said. You and Grandma gave me everything. You are my parents, the only ones that matter. We sat there for a long time after that, not talking, just being together. 2 men who had lost so much but still had each other. I think that was the night I finally stopped wondering about Daniel and Patricia. They had made their choice almost a quarter-century ago, and I had made mine. My grandfather was my family. This house was my home, and nothing Daniel or Patricia could ever do would change that. My grandfather turned 80 that year. I threw him a party, inviting everyone who mattered to him. Old colleagues from his engineering days, neighbors who had become friends over the decades, my own friends who had come to see him as a grandfather figure too. We filled the backyard with balloons and streamers, set up tables under the apple tree, and celebrated the man who meant everything to me. He seemed healthy enough at the party, laughing and telling stories like he always did. But I had started to notice things. The way he got winded going upstairs. The way he sometimes had to stop and catch his breath in the middle of a sentence. The way his skin had taken on a slightly gray tinge that worried me every time I looked at him. The diagnosis came 6 months later. Congestive heart failure. His heart was wearing out, the doctor explained, like an old machine that had been running for too long. There were treatments, medications, things we could do to slow the progression. But there was no cure. It was just a matter of time. I was 26 when we got that news. I had graduated from college 2 years earlier and was working at an architecture firm in downtown Portland. It was a good job, the kind of job I had dreamed about while studying. But when I heard what the doctor said, none of that seemed to matter anymore. I moved back home that same week. My grandfather protested, said I should not put my life on hold for him, that he was not that bad off yet. But I told him the same thing I had told him when I chose to go to college nearby. There was nowhere I would rather be than with him. We fell into a new routine, one built around his medical appointments, his medications, his good days, and bad days. The bad days were hard. Watching someone you love struggle to breathe, struggle to walk across the room, struggle to do the basic things they used to do without thinking. But the good days were beautiful. On the good days, we would sit on the porch and watch the sunset. We would work on small projects in the garage. We would cook dinner together and talk about everything and nothing. My grandfather started putting his affairs in order during this time. He met with his lawyer, a man named Robert Whitman, who had been his friend for over 30 years. They would sit in the study for hours going over documents, signing papers, making plans for a future my grandfather knew he would not be part of. I tried not to think about what they were doing in there. I tried not to think about wills and estates and all the cold practical details of death. But one evening, my grandfather called me into the study and introduced me to Robert properly. Marcus, he said, Robert is going to take care of everything when I am gone. He knows what I want. He has all the instructions. When the time comes, you just need to trust him. I shook Robert's hand, looked into his kind, steady eyes, and nodded. Mr. Whitman, I said, my grandfather speaks highly of you. Robert smiled. And he speaks even higher of you. He is very proud of you, Marcus. You should know that. I did know that. My grandfather told me every chance he got. But hearing it from someone else, someone outside our little family of two, meant more than I could express. What I did not know, what I would not learn until much later, was what else my grandfather had been doing during those meetings with Robert. He had hired a private investigator years ago, around the time Daniel's calls for money had stopped. He wanted to know where his son was, what he was doing, whether there was any chance Daniel might have changed. The investigator had found plenty. Daniel and Patricia were living in California now, in a suburb of Los Angeles. They had gone through 3 houses in 10 years, each one more expensive than the last, each one eventually foreclosed on when they could not keep up with the payments. Daniel had tried his hand at various businesses, real estate, car sales, some kind of investment scheme that had nearly landed him in legal trouble. Nothing stuck. Nothing worked. Patricia had developed a gambling problem at some point, spending thousands of dollars at casinos, chasing losses that only got bigger. Their marriage was in shambles, held together only by their shared desperation and their shared talent for blaming everyone else for their problems. But here's what my grandfather found most revealing. According to the investigator, Daniel and Patricia talked about his inheritance constantly. They were counting on it. They were making plans based on money they assumed would someday be theirs. Daniel was Harold's only child after all. The law was on his side. When the old man finally died, they would finally get what they deserved. My grandfather documented all of this. Every report from the investigator, every phone record showing Daniel only called when he wanted something, every piece of evidence that painted a clear picture of who his son had become. And then he made sure his will was ironclad. I did not learn any of this until after my grandfather died. Until after that day in the lawyer's office, when everything came to light. The last few months of my grandfather's life were difficult, but precious. His health declined steadily each week, bringing new challenges. But his spirit remained strong. He refused to feel sorry for himself. He spent his energy on making sure I would be okay after he was gone. One night, about 3 weeks before the end, he called me into his bedroom. He was in bed more than he was out of it by then, conserving his strength for the moments that mattered. I sat down beside him, and he reached under his pillow and pulled out a small wooden box. "This is for you," he said, pressing it into my hands. "Open it after I am gone, not before." The box was beautiful, clearly handmade with intricate carvings on the lid. I could see it was old, well worn from years of handling. I wanted to ask what was inside, but something in his eyes told me to just accept it to honor his wishes. "I also want to give you something else," he said. He reached up and unclasped a chain from around his neck. Hanging from it was my grandmother's wedding ring, the one he had worn close to his heart since the day she died. "She would have wanted you to have this," he said, placing it in my palm. "For when you find someone worthy of that kind of love..." I could not speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and all I could do was nod. My grandfather pulled me close, hugging me with whatever strength he had left. And then he said the words I will carry with me forever. "You are my true legacy, Marcus. Everything I have built is for you. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." 3 weeks later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, my grandfather passed away in his sleep. I was holding his hand when it happened. One moment, he was breathing shallow but steady, and the next he simply stopped. Peaceful. painless, like falling asleep after a long day. I sat with him for a long time, after not wanting to let go, not ready to face a world without him. My grandfather, my father, my best friend. Gone. I buried my grandfather on a Saturday, in the same cemetery where my grandmother was buried. I had her gravestone cleaned and fresh flowers placed beside it so they could be together again. The funeral was bigger than I expected. People came from all over Oregon, colleagues and friends I had never even met, all of them with stories about what Harold Bennett had meant to them. Robert Whitman was there, of course. He stood beside me through the service, a steady presence, when everything else felt like it was falling apart. Afterward, when most of the mourners had gone home, he pulled me aside. "Marcus," he said quietly, "we need to talk. Your grandfather left very specific instructions about how things should be handled. There is a will reading scheduled for 5 days from now. It is important that you are there." I nodded, too numb to ask questions. Of course, whatever he wanted. Robert hesitated like there was something else he wanted to say. Then he added, "You may want to prepare yourself. There might be some surprises." I did not understand what he meant at the time. I would understand soon enough. The next 5 days passed in a blur. I wandered around the house like a ghost, touching my grandfather's things, sitting in his chair, sleeping in the guest room, because I could not bear to walk past his empty bedroom. People brought food and condolences, but I barely registered any of it. I was lost in a fog of grief that seemed to have no end. On the 4th day, the day before, the will reading, something happened that cut through the fog like a knife. The doorbell rang. I assumed it was another neighbor with a casserole, so I took my time getting to the door. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with 2 strangers. A man and a woman, both in their early 50s, both dressed in expensive clothes that looked slightly out of place in my grandfather's modest neighborhood. The man spoke first. He had graying hair and tired eyes, and something about his face was strangely familiar. "Marcus," he said, and even his voice triggered something in my memory. "Marcus, is that you?" I stared at him, confused. "Do I know you?" The woman stepped forward, putting on a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, honey," she said, "I know it has been a long time, but we are your parents. We are Daniel and Patricia." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. For a moment, I could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at the 2 people who had abandoned me 28 years ago. They looked older than they did in the photograph, of course. But it was them, the same faces that had haunted my childhood questions. Daniel moved like he was going to hug me, but I stepped back instinctively. "We heard about Dad," he said, his voice heavy with what sounded like rehearsed grief. "We came as soon as we could. I am so sorry we missed the funeral. We had no idea until yesterday. That was a lie, and I knew it." Robert had sent notifications to Daniel's last known address. The private investigator my grandfather hired had kept his contact information updated. Daniel knew about the death. He had just waited to make his entrance. "We came to pay our respects." Patricia added, her eyes darting past me into the house. "This must be so hard for you, losing your grandfather. Your grandfather, not our father, not my dad." She was already distancing them from any real connection to him while simultaneously positioning themselves to claim whatever they could. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry, my mind racing. I could have said so many things in that moment. I could have screamed at them, demanded to know why they left, asked if they ever thought about me once in almost 3 decades. But instead, I just looked at them, really looked at them. And what I saw was 2 desperate people who had come not to grieve, but to collect. "There is a will reading tomorrow," I said, finally, my voice flat, "at Mr. Whitman's office, 10 in the morning. I assume you will be there." Daniel's face flickered with something that might have been hope. Of course we will be there. We want to honor Dad's wishes. We want to do right by him." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Doing right by him. As if they had ever done anything right by him in their entire lives. "Then I guess I will see you tomorrow," I said. And I closed the door in their faces. I leaned against that closed door for a long time, shaking. They were back. After 28 years, they were back. And I knew exactly why. The next morning, I put on my grandfather's favorite shirt. It was a simple button-down blue with thin white stripes, and it still smelled faintly of his cologne. Wearing it made me feel like he was with me, like he was giving me strength for what was about to happen. Robert Whitman's office was downtown on the 8th floor of a building that had been there since the 1940s. My grandfather had helped engineer the renovation of that building back in the 80s, a fact I only knew because Robert had told me at the funeral. It felt fitting that this final chapter would take place somewhere my grandfather had left his mark. I arrived 15 minutes early and found Robert waiting for me in the lobby. He shook my hand and looked at me with something like concern. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I do not know," I admitted. "But I am here." He nodded. "That is all that matters. Follow me." We took the elevator to the 8th floor, and Robert led me to a conference room with large windows overlooking the city. There was a long mahogany table in the center, surrounded by leather chairs. A court reporter was already set up in one corner, ready to document everything. And sitting on the far side of the table, dressed in their expensive clothes and their fake expressions of mourning, were Daniel and Patricia. They looked up when I entered. Daniel tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. Patricia's eyes immediately went to the wooden box I was carrying, my grandfather's final gift to me. I saw her calculating, wondering what was inside, whether it was valuable. I took a seat across from them without saying a word. Robert sat at the head of the table and opened a thick folder. "Thank you all for being here," Robert began. "We are gathered to hear the last will and testament of Harold James Bennett. Before we proceed, I want to make it clear that this will was updated 6 months before Mr. Bennett's passing. He was examined by 2 independent physicians, at the time of signing, both of whom certified that he was of completely sound mind and acting of his own free will. All documentation is available for review." Daniel and Patricia exchanged a look. I saw the confidence in their eyes. They were not worried about mental competency challenges. They were just waiting for the good news. Robert cleared his throat and began to read. "I, Harold James Bennett, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The room was silent except for Robert's voice and the quiet clicking of the court reporter's machine. "To my grandson, Marcus James Bennett, I leave the following." Robert began listing the assets. The house in Portland where I had grown up, where my grandparents had loved me unconditionally for 28 years. The rental property in Seattle that my grandfather had purchased as an investment 15 years ago. The land in rural Oregon that had been in the family for 3 generations. I saw Daniel's face change as Robert continued. The confidence began to crack, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. All savings and investment accounts, totaling approximately $2.8 million, I leave to Marcus James Bennett. Patricia grabbed Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "My collection of antique watches and artwork, estimated value of $400,000, I leave to Marcus James Bennett." Robert looked up from the document. "In total, the estate is valued at approximately $4 million. All of it is bequeathed to Marcus Bennett with no conditions or restrictions." The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I had just heard. $4 million. Everything my grandfather had worked for his entire life. He had left it all to me. Daniel broke the silence first. He stood up so fast his chair almost tipped over. "What? That is insane. I am his son. I am his only biological child. You cannot just cut out someone's own son." Patricia was on her feet too. "This is fraud. This is manipulation. That old man was clearly not in his right mind. We will fight this. We will take this to court." Robert remained calm, completely unruffled by their outburst. As I mentioned, Mr. Bennett was examined by 2 independent physicians who certified his mental competency. Additionally, he anticipated that his decisions might be challenged, so he took extensive measures to document his reasoning. All of this documentation will be provided to any court that requests it. He anticipated it. Daniel sputtered. "What does that mean?" "It means," Robert said quietly, "that he knew exactly what he was doing. And why?" There was something else in the folder, another envelope that Robert had not yet touched. He picked it up now and held it out to Daniel. "There is one more item. Mr. Bennett left a letter specifically for you, Daniel. He requested that it be read aloud during this meeting in front of everyone present." Daniel snatched the letter from Robert's hand. His eyes scanned the page, and I watched his face cycle through a dozen different emotions. Anger, then shock, then something that almost looked like shame before it hardened back into anger. "Read it out loud," Patricia hissed. What does it say? Daniel's hands were shaking as he began to read. Dear Daniel, I have waited 28 years for you to change. 28 years for you to become the man I raised you to be. 28 years for you to reach out not for money, but for family. You never did. His voice cracked, but he kept reading. You left your son when he was 4 months old, your own child. And in almost 3 decades, you never once asked about him. Not how he was doing in school, not what his interests were, not whether he was happy. Every time you called, it was to ask for money. Every single time. You treated me like an ATM, and you treated Marcus like he did not exist. Daniel looked up at me for just a second. I could not read his expression. I tried, Daniel. For years I tried to find excuses for you. I told myself you were young, that life was hard, that maybe someday you would come back and make things right. But you never did. And eventually I had to accept the truth. The son I raised, the son I loved, was gone. Maybe he never really existed at all. Patricia put her hand on Daniel's shoulder, but he shrugged it off. Marcus is everything you were not. He is kind. He is responsible. He is loyal. He took care of me and his grandmother when no one else would. He gave up opportunities to stay close to us. He loved us when you could not be bothered to pick up the phone. I felt tears prickling at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I needed to hear this. I needed to see their faces as they heard it too. So I am leaving everything to him. Not because I hate you, Daniel. I do not. I am leaving everything to Marcus because he earned it. Because he deserves it. Because he is my true son in every way that matters. A father is not someone who gives life. A father is someone who gives love. And Marcus has given me more love in 28 years than you ever did. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper now. I am leaving you $1, Daniel. That is more than you ever gave to your own son. I hope someday you understand why I made this choice. But even if you do not, I have made my peace with it. Goodbye. Your father, Harold. The room was completely silent when Daniel finished reading. He stood there holding the letter, looking like he had been slapped. Patricia's face was red with fury, but she had no words. I stood up slowly. I had been silent through this entire meeting, letting my grandfather's words speak for me. But now, I had something to say. You abandoned me when I was 4 months old, I said, my voice steady and clear. You never called. You never wrote. You never even asked if I was alive. Grandpa told me everything. About the phone calls that were only ever about money. About how you never once mentioned my name. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I spent 28 years wondering why you left me. Wondering if there was something wrong with me. Wondering if I had done something even as a baby to make you not want me. And you know what I realized? It was never about me. It was always about you. Your selfishness, your greed, your complete inability to think about anyone but yourselves. Patricia started to say something, but I turned to her with a look that made her stop. I do not hate you, I continued. I do not have the energy to hate you. You do not deserve that much of my attention. But I want you to understand something. You leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it meant I got to be raised by 2 people who actually loved me, who actually wanted me, who showed me every single day what real family looks like. I picked up the wooden box, my grandfather's final gift. I had opened it the night before alone in the living room. Inside was a letter from my grandfather, telling me how proud he was of me, how much he loved me, how I was the greatest joy of his life. There was also my grandmother's wedding ring and a photo of the 3 of us together, taken on my high school graduation day. My grandmother in her wheelchair, my grandfather standing tall beside her, and me in the middle, grinning like I had the whole world in front of me. This is my inheritance, I said, holding up the box. Not the money, not the houses. This. The love they gave me, the lessons they taught me, the life they built for me when you walked away, and no court, no lawyer, no amount of fighting will ever take that away. I walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at them one last time. You can try to contest the will. That is your right. But Grandpa knew you would. He planned for it. He documented everything. Every phone call where you only asked for money. Every year of silence. Every piece of evidence that shows exactly who you are. You will lose. And when you do, I hope you finally understand that money cannot buy what you threw away. I left the conference room without looking back. Robert followed me to the elevator. That took courage, he said quietly. Your grandfather would have been proud. I know, I said. He told me so, every single day. The weeks after the will reading were strange. I expected to feel triumphant, or at least vindicated, but mostly I just felt empty. The house was too quiet without my grandfather in it. The rooms echoed with memories that hurt to touch. And despite everything, despite knowing the truth about who Daniel and Patricia really were, part of me still grieved the parents I never had. I took time off work. My boss understood, told me to take as long as I needed. I spent the first few days just wandering around the house, sitting in different rooms, trying to decide what to do next. On the third day, I went out to the backyard and sat under the apple tree. It was autumn now, and the leaves were turning gold and red. Some of them drifted down around me as I sat there remembering all the conversations my grandfather and I had shared in this exact spot. I thought about my grandmother too, about her kindness, her patience, her unwavering belief in me. I thought about the promises I had made to her at the end to remember that I was loved, to remember that I was enough. I thought about the life they had given me, the foundation they had built, and I realized something important. I was not empty. I was not alone. They were still with me, in every room of this house, in every lesson they had taught me, in every memory that made me who I was. Death could take their physical presence, but it could never take their love. That night, I started making plans, not just for my own life, but for how I could honor my grandfather's legacy. The first thing I did was set up a scholarship fund. I called it the Harold and Eleanor Bennett Foundation, and its purpose was simple: to help young people who had been abandoned or orphaned, to give them the opportunities that my grandparents had given me. I put $500,000 into it, enough to make a real difference for years to come. The second thing I did was keep the house. Some people told me I should sell it, that it was too big for one person, that it held too many memories, but those memories were exactly why I wanted to stay. This was where I had been loved. This was where I had learned what family really meant. I could not imagine living anywhere else. The third thing I did was let go. Not of my grandparents, never of them, but of Daniel and Patricia, of the questions that had haunted me, of the hope that maybe they would someday change, someday regret, someday reach out with genuine love. They tried to contest the will, just as I had predicted, but my grandfather had been thorough. Robert Whitman presented all the documentation, all the evidence, all the medical records proving that Harold Bennett knew exactly what he was doing when he made his choices. The case was dismissed within 3 months. Daniel and Patricia got nothing. I did not hear from them after that. No phone calls, no letters, no attempts to reconcile. And honestly, I was relieved. They had made their choice 28 years ago, and they were still making it now. Some people never change. Some people are not capable of it. But I chose to believe that I was different, that the love my grandparents had poured into me had made me capable of growth, of change, of becoming someone they could be proud of. I threw myself into my work with new energy. I designed houses for families, taking extra care to make them warm and welcoming places where children could grow up feeling safe and loved. I volunteered with organizations that helped foster kids and orphans. I tried in my own small way to pass on what my grandparents had given me. Time passed. Seasons changed. I started dating someone, a woman I met at a charity event for the foundation. Her name was Sarah, and she had lost her parents young too. She understood the particular kind of grief that comes from being abandoned, the particular kind of gratitude that comes from finding family in unexpected places. We fell in love slowly, carefully building something solid and real. I proposed to her under the apple tree with my grandmother's ring in my pocket. She said yes with tears in her eyes, and I felt my grandparents smiling down on us. The wedding was small, just close friends and chosen family, held in the backyard of the house where I had grown up. Robert Whitman was there, looking older now, but still as steady as ever. Sarah's foster parents were there, the people who had taken her in when she was 12. The scholarship recipients from the foundation were there, young people whose lives my grandparents' legacy was helping to change. I thought about Daniel and Patricia during the ceremony just for a moment. I wondered if they knew I was getting married. I wondered if they cared. And then I let the thought go, like releasing a balloon into the sky. It floated away, and I did not try to chase it. Some wounds never fully heal. Some questions never get answered. But that does not mean you cannot be happy. That does not mean you cannot build a beautiful life. The night of my wedding, after the guests had gone home and Sarah was asleep beside me, I lay awake in the darkness, thinking about everything that had brought me to this moment. The abandonment, the love, the loss, the inheritance, not the money. The money was nice, useful, life-changing in its own way. But that was not the real inheritance. The real inheritance was understanding what family meant. The real inheritance was knowing that love was a choice made every day through actions and sacrifices and small moments of connection. The real inheritance was the foundation my grandparents had built inside me, the one that could never be taken away. I got up quietly, careful not to wake Sarah, and walked downstairs to the living room. The wooden box was still on the mantel where I had placed it after the will reading. I opened it and took out my grandfather's letter, the one he had written just for me. I had read it dozens of times by now. I practically had it memorized. But I read it again anyway, letting his words wash over me one more time. Marcus, the letter said, if you are reading this, I am gone. But I need you to know that dying does not scare me, because I know I am leaving the world a better place than I found it. And that is because of you. You taught me that family is not about blood. It is about who stays, who cares, who loves. You are my grandson, my son, my pride. Live well, love deeply, and never let anyone make you feel unworthy. I will be watching over you always. From wherever I am, I will be cheering for you, crying, with you celebrating every victory and mourning every loss. You will never be alone, Marcus, because my love for you does not end with my last breath. It goes on forever. Take care of yourself. Take care of that beautiful heart of yours. And know that everything I had, everything I built, everything I gave to you because you deserved it. Not because of obligation or bloodlines or legal requirements, because you earned it, because you are worth it, because you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you, grandson, always and forever. Grandpa. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Then I sat down in my grandfather's old armchair and looked out the window at the apple tree, its branches bare now in the winter cold, but still standing strong, still reaching toward the sky. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But if you are lucky, if you are truly blessed, life will send you someone who shows you what real love looks like. For me, that was my grandparents, Harold and Eleanor Bennett. The two people who never had to take me in, but chose to anyway. The two people who never had to love me but did so with their whole hearts. Their love was worth more than any inheritance. It was priceless. And it lives on inside me, guiding my steps, warming my heart, reminding me every single day that I am worthy, I am loved, and I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Thank you for being here with me through this story. I hope it touched your heart the way my grandparents touched mine. If it did, please leave a comment and let me know, what does family mean to you? Have you ever found love in unexpected places? I would love to hear your stories. And if you have not already, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that family is not always about blood, that love can come from anywhere, and that being abandoned does not define your worth. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of this community. May you be surrounded by people who choose to love you, and may you always remember that you are enough. You are worthy. You are loved. Take care of yourselves, and hold your family close, whoever that family may be.